They didn't catch him in the dark. They didn't find him hiding in the shadows of a derelict shack, or corner him in the desolate, salt-sprayed bramble of Gilgo Beach where he buried his secrets. No, they caught him in the brightest, loudest, most crowded place on Earth, Midtown Manhattan. For over a decade, the Long Island serial killer was a ghost, a boogeyman who haunted the coastal highways of New York, leaving behind a trail of broken lives and a graveyard of cold leads. He was a phantom that the greatest investigative minds in the country, the FBI, the New York State Police, and local homicide detectives, simply couldn't catch. But every phantom has a physical tether to the real world, and after years of dead ends, and a decade of agonizing silence for the families, the police finally followed a trail of breadcrumbs so impossibly small, most killers would never think twice about them. A single, microscopic strand of hair. A witness who couldn't shake the memory of a giant, an ogre standing in the dark, and a discarded pizza crust, tossed into a Fifth Avenue trash can and left behind like common garbage. By the time the cuffs clicked around his wrists in July of 2023, prosecutors realized they weren't just looking at a recent spree, they were looking at an architecture of death that stretched across 3 decades. And the monster? He wasn't a drifter. He wasn't a man living in the woods. He was living in plain sight. Hi, I'm Fadi, and this is Akumu Files. On this channel, we don't just tell stories, we step into them. We follow the dark, twisted details that most people miss. And today, we are stepping into the mind of a man who spent his days drafting blueprints for towering New York skyscrapers and his nights engineering something far more sinister. This is the chilling, methodical, and complete story of Rex Heuermann, the man accused of being the Long Island serial killer. The Ocean Parkway Nightmare. To understand the sheer magnitude of the arrest in Midtown Manhattan, we first have to understand the nightmare that preceded it. A nightmare that officially began in December 2010, but had been simmering under the surface of Long Island for years. It started by accident. Police were out on the barrier islands of Long Island searching for a missing woman named Shannon Gilbert. Shannon had disappeared in May of 2010 after a frantic 23-minute 911 call in which she screamed, "They're trying to kill me!" As a canine unit pushed through the dense, unforgiving thicket of poison ivy and thorny bramble along Ocean Parkway near Gilgo Beach, the dog alerted to a scent. But it wasn't Shannon. It was the skeletal remains of a woman, carefully bound and wrapped in a burlap sack. The investigators didn't know it yet, but they had just stumbled upon a serial killer's private graveyard. Just days later, as investigators combed the area, they found another, and then another, and then a fourth. They became known to the world as the Gilgo Four: Maureen Brainerd Barnes, Melissa Barthelemy, Megan Waterman, and Amber Lynn Costello. 4 young women, all petite, all working in the same vulnerable profession, all vanishing under similar circumstances, and all discarded in the exact same manner. They were placed roughly 500 feet apart, wrapped in camouflaged burlap, hidden just yards from the roadway. The media went into a frenzy. Long Island was gripped by a terror it hadn't felt since the days of Joel Rifkin. But as the years ticked by, the trail went ice cold. The killer had left virtually 0 digital footprint, no witnesses, and a crime scene that the harsh Atlantic weather and salty air had scrubbed clean of traditional forensics. For 13 years, the case became a graveyard of broken hearts for the families. The Phantom had won, or so he thought. The shadow of the architect. Let's fast forward past the initial shock and look at what investigators know now. We have to look past the suit, the briefcase, and the professional facade of a successful architect. We have to look into the HK documents, the hunter-killer manifesto. It was November 1993 when the shadow first materialized. Sandra Costilla, a 28-year-old woman living a vibrant life in the city, vanished. Her remains were eventually discovered in North Sea, New York. For decades, her death was a mystery, but modern forensic science eventually whispered a different name. A microscopic male hair found on her remains sat in an evidence locker for 30 years. When it was finally tested using advanced mitochondrial DNA technology, it pointed directly to Rex Heuermann. This was the terrifying moment investigators realized they weren't looking at a spree killer. They were looking at a 30-year career of violence. As the years turned into decades, his methods grew more clinical. In July 2007, Maureen Brainerd Barnes traveled from Connecticut to Manhattan. She was a mother trying to make ends meet. She called a friend from a burner phone, mentioned a client meeting, and then she simply ceased to exist. But it was the disappearance of Melissa Barthelemy in 2009 that revealed the true sadistic cruelty of the man behind the mask. After Melissa vanished, her teenage sister Amanda began receiving a series of phone calls. The calls came from Melissa's own cell phone. The voice on the other end wasn't frantic or nervous. It was calm, monotone, chillingly arrogant. He didn't just admit to killing Melissa. He taunted the family. He told them what he had done to her, relishing their grief, feeding off their horror. It was a psychological torture that haunted the family for over a decade. Investigators would later trace those calls to the area surrounding Madison Square Garden, just a few blocks from Rex Heuermann's architecture firm on Fifth Avenue. The violence accelerated into 2010. Megan Waterman was captured on surveillance footage walking out into the 1:30 a.m. darkness of a Holiday Inn Express to meet a client. She never returned, but her disappearance provided a crucial piece of the puzzle. An associate of Megan's described the man she met that night as a mountain of a man, a 6'4" ogre with a flat, wide face and messy hair. And importantly, he was driving a very specific vehicle, a dark, first-generation Chevrolet Avalanche. That same ogre would reappear just months later for Amber Lynn Costello. Her roommates watched as she walked out of her home to meet a client in that same dark truck. They noted how entirely out of place this massive, lumbering man looked in their quiet neighborhood. It was a detail they would never forget, and it was the thread that would eventually pull the killer's entire life apart. The blueprint for murder. Perhaps the most chilling discoveries didn't come until years later. In 2024, investigators tied the architect to even more victims, Jessica Taylor and Valerie Mack. These women had been dismembered, their torsos found in one location, their heads and hands in another. But when police finally seized Rex Heuermann's digital life after his arrest, they found something that made the blood of seasoned detectives run cold. They found his planning document. It read like a professional project manual. It wasn't a blueprint for a skyscraper, it was a blueprint for murder. He referred to it as his HK document, Hunter, Killer. This document contained meticulously detailed files on how to avoid detection. It listed the exact supplies needed: tarps, zip ties, heavy-duty tape, and clutter to hide the bodies. He evaluated his past projects, noting what worked and what didn't. He wrote about the thickness of the plastic and the distance from the road. He was treating the taking of human life with the exact same technical precision he used for his multi-million-dollar architecture firm. He was self-correcting, evolving, perfecting his craft. He was an engineer of human misery. The pizza crust and the arrest. So, how do you catch a man who studies the police just as closely as they study him? You go back to the beginning. In 2022, a new task force was formed. They stopped looking at the big picture and started looking at the data. They didn't search for a serial killer, they searched for a registration. When they cross-referenced the registrations of dark Chevy Avalanches on Long Island with men who matched the description of the ogre, the database spat out a name: Rex Heuermann. The match was instantaneous. He had owned that exact truck during the height of the disappearances. From there, the digital mask began to crumble. Detectives mapped the cell tower pings from the burner phones used in 2010. The geographic data was undeniable. The phones pinged in two distinct areas, near a quiet home in Massapequa Park, and within blocks of an architecture firm in Midtown Manhattan. The architect was no longer a phantom. He had a name, and he had an address. The police knew they had their man, but they needed his DNA to seal the case. Surveillance teams became his shadow. They rode in the same subway cars. They stood behind him in coffee shops. They watched him walk from the train station to his office, waiting for him to make a single biological mistake. In early 2023, that mistake finally happened. After finishing a meal in the city, Rex tossed a pizza box into a public trash can on Fifth Avenue. Detectives moved in and retrieved it almost instantly. Inside that box was a partially eaten, discarded crust. Forensic scientists extracted the DNA from his saliva. They compared it to a single male hair found trapped in the burlap used to wrap the body of Megan Waterman over a decade prior. The results came back. It was a 99.9% match. The biological blueprint matched the physical one. The search for the Long Island serial killer was over. July 13, 2023, Midtown Manhattan. Rex Heuermann was surrounded by plainclothes officers and placed in handcuffs. The world gasped. For 13 years, people had imagined a deranged recluse. What they got was a father of two from the suburbs. What makes this story haunt you is the terrifying normalcy. Rex was a neighbor who complained about his taxes. He rode the train every morning reading the paper. He had a wife and children who claimed to have had no idea that a monster was sleeping in the master bedroom. When police finally raided his home, they found a fortress. Behind a heavy locked door in the basement was a vault containing over 200 firearms. But the real horror was on his hard drives. His search history showed he was actively searching for the Long Island serial killer. He read articles about his own crimes. He researched the exact techniques the police were using to catch him. He was watching the police play a high-stakes game of chess against him. And for years he sat in his basement vault, smiling, believing he was winning. Rex Heuermann is currently behind bars, awaiting the trial that will determine the rest of his life. He maintains his innocence. But the burlap, the burner phones, the taunts, the Ogre witness, and that final fatal pizza crust, they tell a story that's hard to ignore. Every architect knows one fundamental truth. If the foundation is cracked, the whole building will eventually come crashing down. For Rex, the crack was a single strand of hair and a witness who refused to forget his face. What do you think? Did he act alone, or are there more secrets buried in the dunes of Long Island? Let me know in the comments.